Okay, so for this video's project, it is a craft table. Now it has multiple uses. It can be used as an extra dining room table. It can be used as a kitchen island, whatever you really need it for. But mostly it's going to be used as just a heavy duty work table. So everything is solid red oak except for the top. The top is solid maple. Everything else underneath is solid red oak. 2 leaves that can be lowered on both sides. With 2 drawers on both sides. On both sides. As well as the tray underneath, which is a 2-way slide. So if you can access it from this side, you can pull it out. But if you don't want to access from that side, just pull it out the other direction. So I'm gonna go over it step by step on the process and the build. Enjoy. Here's what I got for the legs for the craft table. This is roughly a 5x5 solid oak piece. All right, that is all 4 legs, cut the rough length. Now, the fun part, to square them up, because there isn't a square edge on these. First thing I'm gonna do, find the best side to start with, which is this one. I'm going to get a little cleat here, and then since it doesn't really require any shims, a couple dabs of hot glue just to keep it in place, or CA glue, whatever you want to use. Okay, now that I've smoothed one side, nice and flat, no low spots, I'm gonna take it, make sure that this is clean so there's no debris under it, flip it 180 degrees, and do the other side. So now that I have this edge and this edge are both flat and parallel from the planer, I now need to make a 90-degree angle. So I can't simply take it and run it along the fence because it might be a 90-degree angle, but it's not going to be a straight cut at all. So what I'm going to do is, using the same sled that I just used on the planer, without removing this block, I'm going to take it and go just like this. And again, I'm going to fasten it or secure it in place with a block, just like this. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to run the table saw blade just away from the edge of this sled. And I'm going to overhang this just slightly, say an 1/8 inch, all the way down on the low spots. Make sure it's at least 1/8 inch. In the middle here, it's almost 1/4. So just like that. Secure this in place, and then cut it. my table saw doesn't have the capability to cut through all this material at once. So now that I have this table saw fence set to the exact width that I need, as you can see, it's cut to the exact edge of this sled. So without adjusting this fence, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna flip this end to end so I can cut the other width. But in order to line it up, what I'm gonna do is on this end, the very fine edge, I'm gonna mark this edge, which is now a true 90, and I'm gonna follow this line all the way up through on both sides. And then what I'm gonna do is line up that pencil line with the very edge of my sled right here. And if I don't adjust my fence, it's gonna line up with the other cut. All right, now I have 3 flat and square edges. Now I just did this edge on the table saw, and the last edge on the bottom still has to be plain. So I have a square corner here and a square corner here. So now what I'm gonna do is take it back over to the planer and do the last edge. Now that I am done with the planer and the table saw, I haven't cut this to the dimensions that I need, but I now have 4 smooth and square edges to work off of. Okay, so now I'm gonna cut it to very close to finished dimensions. Now it's gonna be 3.5 by 3.5. I'm going 3 9/16 by 3 9/16. Now, because I can't cut all the way through with my table saw, I'm gonna have to flip it, which may leave some burn marks and may leave some weird line down the middle where the saw meets from both ends. So get it very close to finished dimensions, and then once I finish doing that to all 4 legs, I will do a finish sizing on the planer to get an exact 3.5 on all the legs, so they're all identical. Now that I have 1 leg cut, I'm gonna rinse and repeat all these steps for the other 3 legs, and then I'll do the final dimensioning. There you go. Tapers both sides. It's not perfect. It's gonna have to be sanded slightly, but easy way to make a taper. Take this, knock over any sharp corners. Okay, beautiful. So they make these really awesome little metal dimples. Now, this is for centering for a mating piece for a dowel. On a piece like this that I can't use my centering jig, basically all I'm doing is numbering according to this. So this is 1 to 1 and this is 2 to 2. So all you got to do is put these little things right in here. There's different ones sized for the various dowel size that you're using. Just push these in just like that. Now all I got to do is very carefully line this up to where it has to be. I'm going to hold it. Both of these edges I want flush with each other. So all I'm going to do is keep it flat on the table. use some type of straight edge so that I can line up the bottom, get them as close as possible to each other, like so. And all I'm going to do is just give it a light push, just like this. Now, you can't see it on camera, but what it did is it gave me a little center punch for the exact location for the mating holes for these two dowels. Okay. Now it's ready for assembly. Let me just double check to make sure all of my numbers work out correctly. See that everything lines up before I glue it. So I got bottom 2, 2 and 2. And same over here, 1 to 1. Perfect. Everything's flush on this side and this side right here. Take it back apart, put a little glue in it. A little extra drop in both holes for the dowels. Now, be careful when you're flipping this over because that glue will leak out. All right, 1 to 1. Bottom, 2 to 2. I'm gonna flip this over this way. Makes it a little easier for cleanup. 2 to 2, like so. Nice tight fit. Now, I also have this little scrap of plywood that I'm using on this particular glue up as a spacer. It is the exact same width as this. So I'm basically putting that there just to keep that perfectly square. Now that this is glued up, that's only snug. This is snug. Double check, make sure there's no drips. Make sure the joint's tight, lined up, and we'll set this aside and start working on some more pieces. There's 2 spots. These on. Then I can do the full glue up. Now these have a very specific offset, which is directly related to this specific hardware that I'm using. And I'll show you in a second. But the fold-up leaves are going to be attached to collapsible brackets. And in order for it to have a nice, clean aesthetic, both legs are going to be recessed exactly 15/16 so that the hardware can fit perfectly flush with the outside. I'll show you what I mean. So, I have 2 of these per side, per leaf, and these, once it's all glued up, are going to be attached right here. Now, exactly 15/16 puts this perfectly flush with this. Now you can see what I'm talking about. There's pressure behind that peg, and it's actually squeezing a small amount of glue out through the pores of the end grain. That's why it's really important to have fluted dowels. shouldn't be anything out of square, but always check outside corner and outside corner for square, because you can correct it if it's out of square now before the glue fully dries. So always double check. And it's actually out of square by about 1/16 of an inch. So what I'm going to do is throw one of these clamps on there. I'll show you how to fix this. So, might not be long enough. Well, of course, it's the one with the loose handle. It's always the one with the loose handle. Alright, so what I'm doing is I'm just applying a small amount of diagonal force in this direction to compensate for that small adjustment needed. So now, corner to corner, I got 43 and 11/16 on the dot. And then from here to here, 43 and 11/16 on the dot. Perfect. This may look a little absurd and overkill, but it's really not. So I have this on both sides is the only support for these legs in this direction. So I have these two clamps holding the dimension perfectly where it's got to be at exactly 29 inches. That's what the top of this is. So this and this are just holding it until it dries to make sure that this glue joint dries perfectly straight. This is keeping it perfectly square. It was only off by about 1/16 of an inch, so I just applied this with just a small amount of pressure to just pull in 1/16 of an inch so that it's now perfectly square. And these two clamps are just holding this together until that dries. But always check everything. Check it for square in 6 different directions, just to make sure everything is where it's supposed to be. And you want to work pretty fast with this wood glue. I use Titebond 2, which has about a half-hour set time. So you really want to get it set and situated in about 15 minutes before you really won't be able to move the glue joint anymore. So work as fast as you can to assemble it, and then take your time and be very patient to make sure everything is perfectly square before that glue dries up. Don't just clamp it and walk away from it, because it could be twisted, it could be cupped, it could be bowed, it could be racked, you don't know. So check everything before your glue dries. Now it's time for the fun stuff, dovetails. So I have everything set up in my jig for my bottom drawer to create my tails and my pins. And we're gonna make a nice montage out of this. Bam! for attaching the countertop, I'm using these little angle brackets. Now, one side just has a single circular hole. The other side is slotted. And what these do is they allow the tabletop with wood movement to expand and contract in the direction across the grain. Now, when you install them, you want to make sure that this slot is going across the grain. So the grain on this board is going in this direction. The wood really isn't going to shrink in this direction with the grain. It's going to shrink across the grain. So the slot has to go this direction across the grain. And that's going to allow for the movement. All right, last but not least, I got one last drawer to put in. This thing is done. Now, there we go. Looking beautiful. So here's how these undermount drawers work. Aesthetically, they're not visible from the sides, but from underneath, you see here, they each have a left and a right-handed lock. And this tab here is how you remove the drawer. So if you ever want to remove it, just reach underneath and pull these two levers. So all you got to do is notch for the back corner there and there. And then for locking it in place, there's these little holes where a metal pin actually protrudes into the back of the cabinet to keep it locked in place. These are what I used for the leaves. Now, you'll notice I have black washers underneath. These were terribly out of square, and there's really no adjustment in them. It's just a mechanical lock with a metal lever, and that's it. There's no adjusting the slots or anything to get it perfectly square. Out of the box, they weren't square, so the easiest thing for me to do was to just shim underneath the counter to get it flat, since these were so far out of whack. Now, I thought about like maybe just taking a grinder to it to adjust it, but that wasn't worth the effort because I'd have to re-rivet all these to get it to work properly. So washers was the easiest way to get it to work. And these just lock like this. To unlock it, locked. There, right there. Sure. I am, but it's okay. Why? I can just cut it out. Not a big deal.